We're joined by a very close ally of the president, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a key member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for joining us. As you know, the Pentagon says they've seen a dramatic increase in Russian forces along the Ukrainian border ever since President Biden's phone conversation with Vladimir Putin earlier in the week. Is the threat of sanctions really going to be enough to get Putin to back down?
Well, President Biden had a very forceful and very clear conversation with Vladimir Putin and is mobilizing our closest allies to deliver the toughest sanctions threat that is possible. I agree with the president that Ukraine is a nation of great concern and that we need to stand strong to defend their sovereignty and integrity and independence. But I think that sanctions is the most appropriate tool in this setting, and I think the president made it clear to Vladimir Putin that the sanctions that were imposed after his assault on Crimea and the eastern end of Ukraine will be dwarfed by the sanctions that he will face if he takes action to invade Ukraine now.
Well, you're right, because President Biden did warn Putin of sanctions, in Biden's words, like none he's ever seen if Russia were to invade. But how much can Biden really punish Russia economically without also inflicting significant pain on the global economy, including the U.S. economy, for example, increasing domestic gas prices?
Well, that's one of the challenges, is that the United States and Russia do have interconnected economies, particularly in energy. And we might have to exempt some of the energy ways in which our economies are connected from very tough sanctions. But we've got tools that allow us to target individuals, some of the folks who are the closest supporters of Putin, and to sanction Putin individually. And we've got other means, national means, that could make this extremely uncomfortable. Frankly, I also think that the Russian people are tired of the impact of COVID on their country, and they are not looking forward to a long and bloody conflict with Ukraine. The United States in recent years has provided more and more lethal defensive assistance to Ukraine. This administration has further stepped that up, and I am optimistic that we can still turn Putin aside from deciding on an invasion in the next couple of weeks.
How does President Biden, Senator, reassure Ukrainian President Zelensky when President Biden's already flatly stated publicly that the United States has no obligation to defend Ukraine militarily?
Well, one of the core issues here in this dispute with Putin, he wants the United States and NATO to roll back a commitment made in 2008 under President Bush to open the door to possible NATO membership. And President Biden, in a direct conversation with Zelensky of Ukraine, said, "We will not make a decision about you without you." And the easiest way to resolve this standoff with Vladimir Putin would be to simply roll back that commitment. That would be inappropriate. And Biden is standing alongside Ukraine and saying, we are going to consult with you and work with you and ensure your independence and your integrity.
Before I let you go, Senator, I'm anxious to get your reaction to this reporting from Axios' Barak Ravid in Tel Aviv. We interviewed him in the last hour here in the Situation Room, that former President Trump said, basically said, F Netanyahu, after the former Israeli Prime Minister congratulated President Biden for his election win. What do you make of that?
Well, that's really striking. Wolf, I was recently in Israel to meet with the new Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Defense Minister, Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz. The U.S.-Israeli relationship remains very strong, very close. It's striking that that quote is a reminder that former President Trump really viewed relationships with foreign leaders in a very personal term. He really looked at it as a matter of loyalty. And the fact that former Prime Minister Netanyahu tweeted something very complimentary about President Trump, thanking him for his leadership and his friendship within moments after tweeting a congratulatory note about President Biden's election. And he gets this response, this vulgar, dismissive, disrespectful response from former President Trump, is a sad reminder that sometimes Trump wasn't putting first and foremost the best interests of the nation, but his own personal sense of loyalty or disloyalty. President Biden is focused on what's in the best interests of our nation and in enduring in close relationship with Israel, regardless of who is leading, who is the prime minister of the moment, is in, I think, our country's best interest.
All right, Senator. Thanks, as usual, for joining us. Senator Chris Coons, always good to have you here in the Situation Room. Appreciate it.